Yeah, I'm very pleased that we can do a little bit of interactive kind of demo today, which I always think is really important for doing any kind of coding work, because otherwise it's all just words. And actually coding is words too, which is kind of handy for journalists, because it means you already have a real leg up when it comes to thinking about programming. It's something you want to kind of engage with. But I just wanted to kind of give an overview to start out about why you might want to consider Python, what Python does. So for me, Python is really about scale. So spreadsheet programs, whether you're using Sheets or Excel, things like that, they're great for a lot of exploratory analysis, kind of getting a look at data and doing some certain kinds of calculations. The challenge, of course, as many of you have probably encountered, is that there's a real limit to the size of file that you can work with. And this is one of the ways in which I think Python is super significant for journalism. Also the fact that in my experience, you never do anything just once. And programming languages are very well configured for doing repeat analyses, whether it's because, you get a new data set because it's a new quarter, or because there was some error in the data set that you had to correct and now you need to rerun your analyses. These are all things that coding tools, programming tools are really, really well suited for, in a way that your traditional spreadsheet program might not be, right? Because that can be a very manual process. So one question, if any of you have heard of Python before, or maybe you have friends or colleagues who do some more advanced data journalism, one question is, why Python? Because there are certainly a lot of newsrooms that use R. So Python and R, I will say broadly, can do a lot of the same things. So programming languages are just like natural languages, right? They can all get the same message across in some sense, but they are tuned to certain priorities, right? And so in a very similar way, Python and R can accomplish a lot of the same tasks. And in general, when I've sort of queried folks in newsrooms about why they use one or the other, it has to do with sort of, how many people on the team use X versus Y, right? What's the background of maybe the manager or something like that? But if you don't have another reason for choosing one of these languages, I strongly recommend Python, in part because it's actually just a really popular programming language. Lots of people use Python. It can be used for all kinds of things. It is, I think, today understood to be kind of like the #1 programming language in the world. And it's really well suited for the kind of work that journalists need to do when it comes to accessing data, cleaning data, manipulating it, and visualizing it. So you can scrape website data with Python. You can, clean up messy values in Python. You can do calculations in Python. And you can even kind of plug it in. It has graphing capabilities if you want to do a visualization, whether that's a map or a chart or something. So it is kind of a one-stop shop, for a lot of the tasks that are really key to journalism. R is also very good. It comes out of the statistics community, which frankly has always scared me about it. But the other thing that's advantageous about Python in that sense is that because it is so popular in general, there's a ton of support for it. So there's just a lot of people around the world who are working on tools for Python, who are, posting answers to questions on the web, things like that. So it's easy to find help if you need it. Yes, Python is a programming language. So you're talking about writing code, not putting things into like a graphical user interface, but because of that, it can handle much bigger data sets. So we're going to work with the PPP data today, which has about 600,000 records. And you'll see that Python can handle that sort of in a snap, right? So that's something that your average spreadsheet program is just not going to be able to do. And again, because, for those of you who have familiarity, sort of a lot of comfort with spreadsheet programs, you're probably familiar with the idea of macros, right? Which is basically code, right? A macro is basically saying, I'm going to do this process, I want to repeat this process. When you work in a programming language, you're kind of doing that from the start, which means, as I mentioned earlier, if something changes, you need to repeat something, you need to tweak it. It's really trivial to do that. You can just kind of say, hey, use this file instead of that file, and do it all again. And again, the execution time is usually a few seconds at most. It depends, but also Python is free. So this is great. Excel, proprietary. Excel is proprietary software can be very expensive. And so because of that, you don't have to pay for anything. You don't have to pay for a license. You don't have to buy it. You can, again, get lots of help for free. So, if you're on a budget, like most of us are, that's a really handy thing. It's also really nice for, so there's a program, there's another piece of code called Jupyter Notebook, which is what we call an environment. And so basically it's a place where you can write and run Python code. It runs in the web browser. And actually today, the example we're going to look at is a Jupyter Notebook that is hosted by Google. So you can actually create Jupyter Notebooks on your Google account now. And actually, I'll share a link momentarily that all of you can use to kind of play alongside what I'm doing on the screen. And so what's nice about that is Jupyter Notebook in particular is really designed for kind of teaching and learning and communicating around code. So it supports a lot of stuff around the actual Python. So you can include text blocks, images, links, all of this kind of thing. You see it used a lot, actually. Very often newsrooms will publish their it's a really great way to build data diaries and to share data diaries, for example, because you can kind of contextualize everything that's happening. And it also lets you proceed in a very stepwise fashion. So you'll see when we get into the Jupyter Notebook, you can really kind of take things one step at a time and make sure that they're working the way that you want, or play around with one step before moving on to the next one. And so this makes it a really modular and I think really approachable way to interact with Python. The other nice thing, again, because now Google is offering these, you can kind of attach these, you can run them through your Google account. You don't actually even have to install anything. So historically, one of the biggest headaches with working with programming languages over things like spreadsheet programs has been actually just getting up and running on your machine. And so the nice thing is that here, you don't even have to do that. Now, getting it running on your machine is a lot easier than it ever used to be, but this offers a really nice way to kind of just experiment and play around on a Google account and see what you think, right? If you get some value out of it. If you click on this link and you're logged into a Google account, you should be able to actually open that page, and you'll see a little kind of infinity sign at the top for the Google Colab. And this is actually an interactive piece that we can, that everyone here can work on together. So I'm going to step through that with you all and sort of try to give you a little taste of what Python can do.
I have a question.
Sure.
Just using like this Google hosted, is there any like security concerns or that we should know about?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So actually my research specialty is security and privacy for journalists. I have a book coming out on it next year. So the security concerns are the same as they would be for anything that you would host, that you might store on Google, right? So obviously if you are working with something that's super sensitive that you don't want Google to know about, for example, then you wouldn't want to put it on Google. So again, this is for convenience sake, we're doing this on Google today, but you absolutely can install this locally and use all the same tools. So you can install Python on your local hard drive. If you install Jupyter Notebook, which will give you the same interface that we're going to use today, you can also do that locally. It will appear in a web browser, but it's actually just a web window on your local machine, right? So your local machine can actually, like if you were to save a copy of a web page and open it with your browser, you can look at something that's on your computer via a web browser. It doesn't mean it's online. So yeah, definitely use the same precautions with a tool like Colab as you would with any other sensitive files that you might be working with. Again, in this case for convenience, so that you all don't have to try to install anything. And again, if it's something that it's up to your discretion. We're working with public data here. It's always something to consider about who am I concerned might be able to see what I'm working on. But yeah, that's a great question. Just if you're wondering why is it that .ipynb, it's now called Jupyter Notebook. It used to be called IPython Notebook. So that's why you have that funky extension there. This is, as I said, the nice thing about Jupyter Notebooks is that they really support great documentation. So I just wrote all this text. You can see if I double click in this, right? It just opens up a text editing option. And, it lets me put in links, et cetera. So again, a really nice way to kind of get into some documentation. Now, this is just text, so it doesn't do anything. Of course, I could click on these hyperlinks, but the sort of main part of this is the ability to obviously run code. So you can see here, if I were to hover over here, it says, do you want to add a code block or a text block? So this part that starts with the green text and has the little play button next to it, this is actually our first block of code. So just to give you a background on what this is going to do, the green text is what we call a comment. So a comment is something that the computer is going to ignore. That is inline descriptions that are for the human reader, right? So here you can see I have import PyDrive, which is a library that, which is a chunk of Python code that someone else wrote. Okay, that's what a library is when we talk about code libraries. It just means code that somebody else wrote and made available for others to use. And so somebody wrote a bunch of code, they called it PyDrive, and what it does is it allows us to connect to a data file that's stored in a Google Drive. So in this case, I took that, the PPP data, and I uploaded it to my Google Drive, and I made it publicly shareable. And using the, as we'll see in a second, using the file ID of that, you all should actually be able to load it into your notebook. Now, I tried this a couple of different ways. You can definitely write code that rather than getting a file from Drive, for example, will upload it to from your local hard drive. Trick is that this is a pretty large data set. It's 125 megabytes. And when I did that, uploading it from my computer, it took like 5 or 8 minutes for the whole thing to upload. So more time than we would probably want to spend. And I always think it's really important to include links to where you found solutions. So if you want to just see the official documentation that this code comes from, and this is a great example of how there's tons of resources out there that you can find. I just Googled, I just searched for, how do I connect Python, how do I connect a data file in Drive to a Colab, and I came across this documentation. So that's kind of how it works. So what I want you to show, what I want you to do here, if you have this open, is go ahead and hit the play button. And I don't know if this is going to demo it for me because I started this previously. But you can see how it's got this going. Okay, so hopefully many of you have gotten this link, and it says go to the following link in your browser. What this is going to do is it's going to bring up a separate window, and it's going to say, hey, do you want to allow access for the Google Cloud SDK to this account? Now, you will have to accept this if you want to follow along in this notebook. But you can see it's very intuitive. It just says, copy and paste this link. This is obviously just like a random string. And I'm going to come back to the notebook and paste it in here. And then I'm just going to hit enter, okay? And nothing happened, right? And this is actually one of the most important things to understand about code in general is that it follows what I like to call the no news is good news rule. If you execute and it seems like nothing is happening, then you know that at least it isn't broken, right? And when I say that it isn't broken, I mean that it's grammatically correct. So just like with any kind of writing, right? I'm sure you all have seen in at times a sentence that is grammatically correct, but nonsensical, right? Like it follows the rules, but it doesn't mean anything useful. That's absolutely possible to do in code as well. So when we hit that play button, what it's saying is this grammatically correct? Yes. That doesn't necessarily mean it does what we want it to, but we know that at least we haven't, at least the computer thinks it understands what we're trying to do. So I promise we're going to get on to the good stuff in a second here. So the next thing is that we've run this bit of code. We're now going to come down to this next block of code and hit the play button here. And you'll see it's processed for me already. This loading button is going to turn back to a play button in a minute. What this has done, and again, I've linked to where I found the documentation for this, is this, what you see here is actually the URL of the file that I have in Drive, right? So it's a copy of the PPP data CSV. And I've just excerpted this kind of gobbledygook alphanumerical string. That's the file ID. So that's the unique name that Google has for this file. And what I'm doing here is I'm actually using some code from this library that I imported previously. And I'm saying, essentially, I want you to make a copy of the data file that's at that location. I want you to make a copy of it and make it available here and now in this notebook, okay? And this command that says print the title of the imported file gives me the file name. This is sort of a local name. This data file.csv, it's data_file.csv is how I'm going to refer to the copy of that shared file for the rest of this notebook. Okay. Now this is kind of a lot to process. Unfortunately, there's no real way around this. If you were working on this on your local computer, you wouldn't have to do any of this, right? So you would basically skip to the next part where you just pointed at a data file, a regular data file, the way that you would in any case. You just say, get PPP file where you had downloaded it, for example. So this is this is a feature of the fact that we're doing this on the web rather than on our local computer. So from other data analysis work, that before we can really do anything with our data file, what's in it, right? We kind of want to know what columns do we have, how many rows do we have, things like that. More on the not honest, I don't do this in code. I actually just do this in like text edit or something like that because I find it easier to just inspect that way. And usually those really basic programs don't have a problem with even pretty large files, but we can certainly do that in Python. And to do that, we are going to use another library called Pandas. So Pandas is, again, something, if you've heard anything about Python, you've probably heard about before. Again, a library is just a bunch of code that someone else has written that saves us some effort, right? It provides shortcuts. It provides recipes. I like to describe them as recipes because that's exactly what they are. And we can kind of say, I want to use this recipe or that recipe so that it means I have to write less code. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import Pandas. And when I see this import Pandas as PD, all I'm doing is actually just giving it a shorter name. So instead of writing out the name of the Pandas library every time I want to use a recipe out of it, I can just write PD, right? So that's another sort of thing that happens a lot in programming. People kind of try to make things really short. I put a strong emphasis on trying to make things descriptive as much as possible, so it's easier to read because the computer doesn't need it to be shorter. It's fine. The computer will understand no matter what. The question is, what can we as the programmers understand? So now here we go. What we're going to do is we're going to use, what we're doing is we're creating a variable called PPP_data. A variable is just an empty box. It's a box that we ask the computer to create and give it a name. And the name that we're giving it is, in this case, PPP_data, right? So we're saying create an empty box, and into that box, what I want you to do is put the results of reading the CSV data file CSV, right? So again, this is essentially the same thing that you do when you click File Open in Excel and you choose a file. It's essentially what we're doing here. We're just doing it with programming language and scripting. And this next thing is this print data columns, PPP data columns, is going to actually give me an output. It's going to show me the headers. So again, I'm not working with a graphical user interface. So if I want to know what all the column headers are, I have to ask it specifically for the column headers. So when I hit this play button, what I should get is a nice little list that shows me the names of the various columns in this file. Okay, so I think this is a good point about Python Jupyter Notebooks, is you have to do every step in order. So it looks like you may have missed hitting the play button on one of our modules there. So what you can do is go back and make sure that you hit play on this import pandas as PD, and then try to hit this next one.
Okay.
Right. So that is one of the, and actually this is one of the things, I put it in the top here. that notebooks like this are great for kind of demoing and sharing data diaries. They're not so great for production code because it's exactly the problem that Peter just ran into, right? So you actually have to go through and manually click each, well, you can actually say run all, but if you're stepping through it, you have to make sure that you hit each one in order if you want it to behave properly. If you were using, sort of a plain programming file, you wouldn't have that problem. So that's a really great demonstration of one of the key features of the notebook. So hopefully many of you who are following along have been able to get to here. And what you see is these are our column headers, right? So now we can actually just start doing stuff right away because there's a lot of built-in recipes, in this case in that Pandas library, that are going to let us, get information about this data set. And remember, we're actually running this on the whole 600,000 rows every time we click a button here, right? So this isn't a subset, this isn't a part of it. We're looking at the whole data set right now. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to say ppp gender.gender. So gender is the name of my column name here. Where is it here? Gender. And I'm asking for unique. So this is a way that I'm just trying to understand what the possible values are in that column, right? And so there's 3 possible values: unanswered, female owned, and male owned. So this is going to help me if I wanted to, again, do some more quick analysis and say, okay, how many, for example, if I wanted to know how many entries there are with each of these values. So I think you've talked about pivot tables. There's actually a pivot table recipe in Pandas. And again, I've linked here to the the page where I found the recommendation for the solution. But basically what I'm saying is, again, take my data set. I want to do a pivot table with it. And on the gender index, right, so the gender entry, I want to know the size of it. So I want to know how many times each entry appears. And when I hit play on that, what I'm getting is the count, right, across all of the entire data set, how many are female owned, male owned, and unanswered, right? So all we're doing right here is we're just doing some really quick summary statistics, which you can see we can do with a very little bit of code, and it takes like 2 seconds or less, which, with other tools, even more robust spreadsheet tools, like I'm a big fan of OpenRefine. I don't know if anybody's used that here, but even with OpenRefine, this could be kind of a bear, right? To try to just do a simple thing like count how many times something appears in your data set. Next, I want to look at the average, or the arithmetic average, the mean of jobs retained by female, male, and unanswered ownership, right? So we get a sense that it's about 50 jobs. Doesn't seem to be a huge difference there, although all of the caveats about whether we should be looking at the mean apply. And similarly, I can do something if I want to know how many loans went to each state or territory, right? I can use the same thing, and you see it's the same thing as entry 8 up here, right? I can do that, but instead of looking at gender, I'm going to look at state. And again, I run this, and I get this nice little output that shows me, every state, how many loans are in this data set for it, right? So again, this is something where we know that we can get the data by state, but that's not a huge help in comparing the volume of loans that went out by state. Does that make sense? Any kind of questions right off the bat for this thing? We're just sort of doing really quick hit, like top line, what's in the data set sort of stuff.
Yeah, the output, right now it's the output is alphabetical A to Z. Can you switch it so the output is the number of loans, biggest to smallest, or something like that?
Yes, you absolutely could. And you can kind of get as sophisticated with this as you want. So what I would say is that your sort of internal metric for is this possible, you can start with everything that you would be able to do in a spreadsheet program, right? So if you can sort in a spreadsheet program, you can sort in Python. If you can do a pivot table in a spreadsheet program, you can do a pivot table in Python. I don't actually have off the bat how to do that in front of me, because to be honest, I'm not really a pandas expert. I'm more of a straight Python person, but it is a super useful library, and there are a lot of folks who know a lot about pandas, and some great books and tutorials on that. But yeah, so that's a starting point. But there's also a lot of things that you can do with coding languages that you can't do in spreadsheet programs. So my sort of favorite example of this. This is sometimes considered a sophisticated technique, but there's something called regular expressions. And regular expressions in programming languages are something that lets you, are really helpful when you need to kind of match parts of something. For example, if you have text fields, right, and you know there are, you want to look for different potential variations of a name, right? Regular expressions are really great for that. It's like using, 5 or 10 different find and replaces because of differences in capitalization or misspellings or things like that. You can write a regular expression that will handle all of that in one fell swoop rather than having to do manual processes. That's an example of something, again, in addition to scale, right? In addition to being able to do this work on 600,000, 1 million, 5 million rows without difficulty, it also lets us do some things that a spreadsheet program can't. But if you're wondering, does it do X? If your spreadsheet program can do it, then you can definitely do it in Python. So the sort of last thing, because I know we're coming up to it, and I do want to leave time for questions in case anyone has other specifics. This is all well and good, right? But to me, my next question would be, how do I get this out of here, right? So kind of along the lines of maybe I want to sort it in the code, but maybe I'd rather just say, hey, I want to pull this into a spreadsheet program and save it and, keep it for reference, right? And you don't want to do this every time. It can absolutely export these things to, regular files. So what I'm doing here when I hit play here is I'm again, creating another variable, so another empty box. Anything that appears on the left-hand side of an equals sign, right? That's saying create an empty box and give it this name. So I gave it the name by state, okay? And I'm taking the results of this aggregator function size. And what I've done here is I've passed it to a recipe called toFrame. This isn't actually strictly required. Without getting into too much detail, things that kind of look the same to us are viewed differently by the computer. So you can see, just for example, right, when I printed it out here, you just sort of see it as like columns of text. When I add this toFrame and then I print it out, I get this sort of alternating rows, and it's a little bit prettier. That's partly a result of having said, convert this to a frame. That's a data frame, which is sort of the native object of the sort of, that's how Pandas sees structured data. So you can think of a frame as being very much similar to a database table or a sheet in a spreadsheet, right? But I can take this, and in any case, again, I'm going to import another library, which lets us do file manipulation. And if I hit play on this, what I'm going to do is this is actually going to give me a download, okay? So if you run this, you're going to actually be able to download a copy of this sort of aggregate slice of the data, which then again you could use to, you could use that, open that up in your favorite spreadsheet program, download it, share it, what have you. So it really is a kind of a multifunctional tool, right? I can start with structured data and pull that into the programming language, do a little bit of analysis. And then, oh, sorry, Julie, let me get to you in 1 second. Do a little bit of analysis, and then you can spit out the results in, your friendly neighborhood CSV. So it's, as I say, it's a good way to get started. Now, let's say, just for argument's sake, that they release an update to the PPP data in a month, 2 months, right? And you have written a notebook, or you've written a Python program that does a bunch of stuff that you care about, right? It gives you the summary stats, it sorts things, it aggregates by veteran status or what have you, whatever you need for your analysis. The beauty of this is that rather than having to then, do your machinations again in a spreadsheet and kind of follow your data diary, the Python code is your data diary and your actions and your calculations all at once. So what I could do is you could point it to a different file, right? You can point it to the updated source file and just hit go, right? And it's going to do all the same stuff on the new data. So it's a very efficient way to handle data analysis, especially in instances where you feel like, hey, this is probably something I'm going to have to do once. So, from my experience in a newsroom, my experience in a newsroom is that you always do things more than once, right? For any number of reasons. You make a mistake, something gets left out, something gets updated. But, I think to me, the key thing always, no matter what you're doing, whether you're programming, whether you're using a programming language or a spreadsheet program or what have you, is just to write down your steps, right? Really be detailed in your data diary. And then usually my rule was 3. When I start to do something the third time, that's where it makes sense to write a program for it, right? Because I know it's gonna come back and it's gonna keep kind of draining my time otherwise. So let me just pop really quickly. I'm gonna. Do folks want to see? Let me actually show one more thing on the screen share. I haven't forgotten about you, Julie.
Yeah. So we have a couple. Julie's question and a question from Mark, and we need to kind of wrap up in the next 6 or 7 minutes.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm basically done. I just for Julie, one thing that I'm not sure. Your company's firewall could be causing a problem because it might be blocking Google. And if your company's firewall is blocking Google, this absolutely will not work because this particular version is hosted on Google. So just to reiterate that you can absolutely install this stuff on your local machine, or maybe if you were using it from home, you would be able to, any place where you can get to your Google account, you should be able to get to this. I will just say also to revisit Peter's issue and just highlight that this is possible. Where is am I sharing my screen?
You're showing the NPF Python demo.
Yeah, okay, great. Is that, so I sort of fibbed a little bit when I said you have to go through and hit each button every time. You can actually come up to this menu and say, run all. And what it will do is it will run through and it will automatically, it's sort of like another version of running a macro, right? It will run each snippet in order, right? And refresh the output. So if you kind of want to see what's going on and you don't want to have to click through manually, you can always choose that. If you just want to kind of rerun your code really quickly.
Presumably later in the year, as the PPP loan data is updated, because the companies will be applying for to change their loans from loans to grants, and so I'm assuming that the SBA is going to be updating things and putting out updated information every week or every month. So if you have your Python program and you just point it to the new updated data and then hit run all, it'll go through and do everything for you at once.
Yep, absolutely. So, you'd need to make sure, if you remember the part where I had that file ID, you would need to change that piece, right, to point to the new file. But other than that, absolutely. And if you were running this locally and it has the same name or something, you can do that. But yes, absolutely. That's really the power that's one of the key features of this kind of tool, is that you can just point it at and go. So to Mark, the single best free resource tailored for journalists that will allow you to teach Python to yourself at your own pace. That's a really good question. I will say that I'm actually currently writing a book on this, which will come out next year and certainly will not be free, or at least most of it. Some of it will be free. It's a good question. I don't actually know off the top of my head. For example, I've been teaching data journalism for many years at Columbia, and my YouTube channel has a ton of videos on how to do various things in Python. So I certainly invite you to check that out if you want. I can put I can link it in here. It has probably 6 years worth of Python analysis. Chris, do you have a copy of Jackie's book?
Yeah, so this is Jackie's book. Jackie was on the call last night, right, Sunny?
Jackie couldn't make it last night, but she is in, and you'll all get this. And also this book is in the resources along with 4 Python tutorials, including one that Chicase's professor, your colleague Susan at Columbia, was giving his website. So you can check them out.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah. So, and and like I said, I can share my, I can pull up my YouTube. I have to go find it. Chikase, by the way. Chikase was also a student of mine.
and Jackie, she has Washington Post experience in her background. She actually worked with Derek Willis several years ago when she was a news applications developer at the Post for a few years. So she thinks like a journalist. Yeah,
absolutely. Let me see.
Yeah, Susan, if you can give us the link, or you can send it afterwards and we can add it or send it around. That'd be great.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. This is I'll pop it in right now. Sort of like everything I've done in a long time, for a long time. Forget that CUJ data fall 2013. That's actually just associated with my username. There's stuff in there up to this past spring, so just a couple months old. But if you look through, I cover scraping websites with Python, doing basic data analysis, doing some visualization. But I will say the one thing that I always say when approaching a programming language, which is I wouldn't recommend, like, in general, give yourself a project, right? Give yourself a task you actually want to accomplish. That's why I said that with a idea, because if you have something you're trying to do, it'll be much more effective for you in actually learning the language, because you'll search for answers to questions that come up as you encounter them, and you'll sort of get a familiarity over time. But I wouldn't necessarily say, and you'll see that. I mean, Jackie's book is a great example. Like it has examples right from the beginning, things that you can work through alongside them. I think that's really important. It's a practical skill, right? This isn't an academic skill. So you want to make sure you give yourself something to work on and something that's going to be of value to you, because otherwise, who cares, right? Like, if you can't get a story out of it, what's the point? I am writing that book. It's going to be also with O'Reilly. If you are interested, it's probably going to have some early release chapters in the fall, but it will come out next summer. But this is actually putting a very different hat on. So I am a researcher. I specialize in security and privacy for journalists, and I am currently doing some work on online harassment, focusing on women journalists, particularly in the US right now. And so this is just to put out a call if you are a woman journalist that uses social media and you would like to participate. It would take about 90 minutes all told. And for a $50 gift card, you can help us build some tools that will help reduce harassment of women journalists online. And if you have followed this issue at all, you know it's a really big one. And if you've experienced it, then you know it's a really big one too. So just to invite you there, you can reach me at my Columbia email address. I'd be happy to chat over email or phone or whatever if you have questions or think you might want to participate. Thank you all very much. And if you have other questions, you can ping me at my email as well. I'll just put it in the chat here.
We'll get your email to all the fellows. And I'd forgotten about that. She wants to give money to journalists. So
yes.
So yay for that.
It is a gift card, but it's still money.
It's money. A gift card from where? Do we have to go to one specific Manhattan restaurant, or is it?
No. It'll be universal? Amazon or Seamless, whatever, generic ones. Yeah.
All right.
And yes, you're very welcome to share widely. Please do. And I can even send you a tweet or an email if you want to forward it to folks. We're really, really eager to get participation. So yeah, whoever you are, whatever you're doing, we'd love to hear from you.